Good evening. I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center. And today we're going to go a bit deeper than normal, and we're going to write about loss. For this webinar, we're going to start by looking at an assignment from the FAMO 325 course, where you are asked to graphically depict and reflect on a substantial loss in your life. And so I do want to give a content warning. We are going to be specifically discussing in some of our examples the sudden death of a family member. So if this is something that you do not wish to experience in this medium, the slides are available to download. And this is also something where, for your own reasons, when you are doing this assignment, you may elect to write about something that is not a loss of a person, but the loss of a substantial thing in your life. Some people describe moving from an area, losing a job, perhaps the end of a relationship for other reasons, such as a divorce. And if you need a copy of the slides that does not have this particular set of examples, please send us an email and we'll provide that. With no further ado, let's dive in. Now, before we get into writing about loss, we do need to take a quick look at how to write in first-person perspective in APA style. Because if you've done this before, then it's second nature. If you haven't, and you're thinking, I don't think I'm allowed to do that, yes, APA 7th edition does allow you to use first-person perspective, because it's actually very helpful to clarify that you are talking about yourself doing research, a personal action, or a professional action, rather than someone who looks and sounds kind of like you, but we're not entirely sure because you're not using a straight I statement to say, oh, I did this, or I had this happen to me. So when you're referring directly to yourself, and in some cases, like if you're using we, co-authors or co-researchers, it's very helpful to see quickly, concisely, oh, that was you personally, especially to clarify who did what and to avoid anthropomorphism when you attribute human qualities to something that is not sentient. And in this case, we were talking about your personal response to something. And so that is something where I, my, me are all very appropriate. So when you're talking about personal beliefs in APA style, you can and should use personal pronouns like I and my when describing your views, like I believe that, I define this as, or I understand that. My personal belief is that, or the most important thing in my life, or a tragedy that just struck and has stayed with me is blah. Also, when you're writing about your actions, you can use personal pronouns to say things like, oh, I am currently working on, I am currently processing, I plan to, I am no longer interested in this. I have asked two coworkers to be accountability partners. And when you are writing about yourself, unless it so happens that your specific views or actions have been documented in published format, you shouldn't be citing sources for these. I mention this because there are some cases where authors have written about their own experience and then cite them so that other people who want to learn more can go and read that published source on it. But generally for a course paper, this is not the case. So let's not worry about this unless you do actually have a published biography or biographical material. Now, you can still use citations to clarify what you are referring to explain basic terms, etc. And that's something that the reflection paper here asks you to do. And remember, because this almost always comes up hand in hand with using first-person perspective, remember that APA style discourages the overuse of passive voice, not prohibits it. So if you're writing a paragraph about yourself and the first sentence says, I did X, this was important. We get from the topic sentence saying this is about you, because of the use of the personal pronoun I. And so the rest of the sentences don't need to start with I as well. Or in the example here, where you can see more graphically that some use of passive voice is acceptable to avoid having a string of sentences that all start with I. Something like, I have developed a 5-stage plan for personal improvement. During the first stage, the focus will be on this. During the second stage, the focus will shift to. It's not that you couldn't word those all having I statements, but it distracts from the focus a bit. If you were to have, I have developed a 5-stage plan for my personal improvement. During the first stage, I will focus on this. During the second stage, I will focus on that. That just keeps inserting yourself to the front of it rather than drawing attention to the specific stages of your plan for personal improvement. So let's take a look at that assignment now. This is coming from the Child Life course. This is a week 5, assignment 1, the reflection on loss. And if we just look at the instructions as presented in the Canvas website, it may seem a lot, but that's why it's helpful to keep in mind what information you need to pay attention to at a particular time. And so you'll see on the next slides, I've divided this information into different tasks. So the first one is just the assignment preamble. This is giving us an understanding, what's the larger purpose of this assignment? To reflect on personal loss or grief. Then we have a preparation task we have to do before doing the deliverables. So first, to review a quote from the textbook, the effective caregiver needs to be aware of her own feelings, beliefs, and values around illness, death, and dying, and to process personal experiences. This is not here accidentally. I recommend, if you're ever at a loss for what to write, to return to this and see, how can I relate the things I've written about back to this quote? And of course, if you are writing something like, oh, as noted in the Handbook of Child Life text, parentheses, author date, and then have your discussion of that, well, by all means, include a citation like that to make it clear you are discussing that specific text. Now, if we look at the assignment instructions, we can divide it into some general instructions. Those are these ones here, let's say APA formatting and title page, reference page, and make sure that you're using scholarly sources. And then the 2 deliverable chunks, or the main deliverable chunks. The first is to create a visual timeline of your own personal loss or grief experiences. And it says here, oh, you could share about the loss of a loved one or a symbolic loss like a divorce, moving to a new town, a new diagnosis, loss of a job or opportunity, as a related aside. So I am a runner myself, and I know many people who, as age and toil on their body and sometimes other circumstances intervened, they lost the ability to do the athletic things that were very important to them. And that sort of thing can have a profound effect on how you feel about yourself, how you view the world and everything. And many senior citizens report that decreasing mobility, decreasing hearing, sight, that these things narrow their world in a way that when they think about it can be devastating. So whatever your experience is, uh, you can write about it. Just make sure it's clear how and why it is so significant. Now, in understanding the progression of events here, you're asked to create a visual timeline with at least 5 significant events. And we have a variety of tools, and you're asked to expand your familiarity by using a tool you haven't before. We'll look at this in PowerPoint shortly. But yeah, this is open-ended on the exact tool. And then there's also a 2 to 3 page reflection paper that's asking to explain your own grief response through the construction of the timeline, to discuss the impact of this grief experience on your professional growth, to include how aspects of who you are, your culture, your upbringing, ethnicity, religious beliefs perhaps, and more, have impacted your grief response, describe your coping style, articulate your comfort level for working with various kinds of losses, and share how your own grief journey might affect your role as a child life specialist. We're going to come back to these in a little bit. I mentioned again that these are kind of framing expectations here, as opposed to the content expectations on these 2 slides. And then we have a rubric, which tells you that each of these content things and the framing expectations have a serious amount of points associated with them. So make sure you do have at least 5 major points, because that's a very large portion of the grade going to having those elements there. Again, a content warning, the particular examples that we're going to be using from here on are going to involve the sudden death of a family member. If you need an alternate copy of the slides that uses a loss that is not of this particular sort, just send us an email and we can send one to you. All right, so let's talk about creating a timeline in PowerPoint, because that's the first task we're given here, besides the framing reading. To create a visual timeline of your own personal loss or grief experiences. And we need at least 5 significant events. So just the first step in this, we want to make a list, analyze a list, and ask yourselves, how are things grouped in sense of impact or timing or in resolution, if applicable? And a good step before you start making a graphic, before you start making your visual timeline, to ask yourself what sense of system of visual organization most impactfully presents the timeline. And when we go about that, you can say, oh, well, okay, death of a family member. First thing was when you learned of it, perhaps telling other people in the family about it. A memorial service could be a funeral, could be a celebration of life, or more. For this list, I've chosen the pilgrimage to an important place afterwards, and then a sense of personal loss every day later. The thing about grief is that it rarely has a linear cycle where it begins and then recedes into distance and is entirely gone. In some senses, this is something wonderful because it gives us an appreciation of those who have gone, and a sense that their mark on our life continues. And also, it can be profoundly difficult because years and years later, a sudden thought can bring a tear to the eye or more. And so, how you rank these, whether they come as a linear thing, as a cycle, or something else, well, that's something you can show us in your visual timeline. And so, for this next portion, we're going to talk about how to take a list and present it in PowerPoint. Now, in this example here, you can see I've taken the list here, and I'm going to start out by going to the Insert tab here. And we're going to use, because we're using PowerPoint, the Smart Art tool here. So insert a Smart Art graphic. And just to start, we're going to look at these different options and think about how these might represent or not represent the thoughts. Now, one way to process the death of a family member, especially if you are one of the younger members of the family, is you may experience multiple losses. And so let's say we start with this. And so here, I've got my list here, and I've just pasted it in, and you can see, starting with that bulleted list, it has automatically arranged them there. And I might look at this and say, oh, hold on, there's actually something we want to add. So I might add an additional item here and say, okay, and I don't know what might be on your journey, but often people are surprised at how other people react or how they themselves react. And you might be looking at this and saying, well, okay, this captures some of the sense, but there's more. And so you might look at this and say, hold on, do these arrows give you a sense of that you're moving more? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But you can also look at these other things here, and sometimes people have a sense of, oh, there's progress where it's leading towards something. So for example, this arrow here, we have that big featured every day later as that is the point of arrival. That is where we've gotten. And that might be something where it's the death of a particular family member, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, something like that. And if this captures what you are feeling more, then this is a great infographic style for your visual timeline. What will give that its weight, though, is really when you are discussing that in your paper. So here, just to illustrate here, I'm going to, again, bring up our smart art here. And when you are looking at it, so you have a variety of ways that you can depict this. And so here, we're just going to go ahead and say, well, what if we used this here, this layout instead? And you see that I just, with everything selected, I went up to Smart Art and then selected a different option here. And it might be something where you look at this and you say, well, okay, that really isn't what I'm feeling so much as this is just things stacking on top of each other. And you say, okay, well, I think that this captures it better. Or you might look at it and say, all right, maybe it's something where there are things going in different directions, or they're leading to a point. And if we look at this, we see that we need to organize it differently, and that this particular way of organizing the events is giving it a dramatically different and a sense of things. Now, it could be that this order is not what you have in mind. It could be that everything is leading to this every day later. So we're going to take this and we're going to move that up here. And you can see that we're getting a different hierarchy of things, but the sense of convergence. And I don't know what you will select, but I do know that it tells the story in a different way and emphasizes different details. So let's talk about outlining and a little bit about researching. Most of the research, we have other webinars on this topic, but let's talk first about understanding how to take these instructions and how you might organize this. It's a shorter reflection, 2 to 3 pages of content, but still you want to make sure that you are clearly telling yourself what you need to write where, and to give the person grading this a clear sense of, oh, here's a response to that. Ideally, a full response and give full credit. And so you might say, okay, well, I'm going to put a heading here called My Grief Response, the Key Events. I'll discuss the impact of this grief experience on my professional growth. Well, I'll state that very directly in the heading, impact on my professional growth. Next one, you can take this and group it together in something like the filter of my identity. And you have many different choices on what you'll use for labeling that, but you generally want to err on the side of precision and conciseness. And then there's room for a lot of individual preference there. Coping style, well, you're talking about you, so my. We talked about personal pronouns already. And then to describe the coping style, so just having those words in the headings makes a lot of sense. Same thing with, describing your comfort with different kinds of loss. And this last one, your grief journey and current role. Now, some suggestions for phrasing. Again, if you are less familiar with using first-person perspective, remember, it always helps for your reader to know who you're referring to by explicitly identifying whose thoughts or experiences these are. So make sure to align the topic sentence of each paragraph with a specific bulleted prompt. So, for example, explain your own grief response to the construction of the timeline. Oh, well, phrasing like, oh, constructing the timeline was very emotional for me. and I had to stop several times because I was crying. So the first part gives us a claim that it was very emotional for me. And then we get some evidence for why, or the explanation of how it was. You say, I had to stop because I was crying. Now, you don't want to just give summary statements. You want to unpack, to explain, and give evidence supporting them. For example, continuing on this same theme, oh, this experience shows me that even though it has been several years, the loss of my grandmother is still something very raw and personal. Now, a common question we get about something like this is, well, wait, shouldn't I be using past tense to refer to something that has taken place in the past? Generally so. But if you are describing an ongoing phenomenon, something that is still the case, saying this experience is still showing me, then present tense is absolutely appropriate. So the difference between this experience shows me and this experience showed me is that the first one is talking about something that is still going on, that is still the case. And the second one is talking about an event that happened in the past and is not having the same impact or changes before. When you're writing about this, sometimes people say, well, I don't know what to write because I just have these feelings. Well, tell us those feelings. And remember, the feelings after loss are part of your lived response of your life, and they're not necessarily good nor bad by themselves. For example, the statement, my uncle's death was a great surprise. Even though I knew that he was suffering from kidney disease, I did not expect it. This doesn't tell us, are you a good person or a bad person or anything like that. This is saying this happened. I was surprised by that. I did not expect it. And then when you tell us how you feel about it, how you understand it, how you process it or have processed it, that's where we make sense of it. Now, when you tell us how you interpret your feelings and the events that you describe. So, for example, if you had, because my aunt passed away during the first month of COVID-19 pandemic, that should be of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was left with what DOCA 2009 described as disenfranchised grief. My area was experiencing lockdown, and as I lived alone, I did not have anyone to talk to, which left me feeling terrible. So the second example there, it starts with a statement of context. My aunt passed away during the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then it describes the reaction and framing that reaction with one of those sources that you have identified. Doka described this this concept of disenfranchised grief when you are not allowed or not able to go through the normal process, like when something must be kept private or you can't gather. And this is a concept that is very familiar to people who live far away from their families and they're unable to attend a funeral in time. Or for a lot of people in the armed services, they miss major milestones in life because of how far away they are and the duties that they have. And so we have that last example that is explaining the circumstances and how they felt about that. And that how they felt about it interpretation is really powerful in giving this weight. Another way to put this, don't just summarize, analyze and synthesize. Tell us things like, how do you understand what happened and what you felt? Such as, I realize now that I was acting out and that my stern critiques to my direct reports were misdirections of my grief. You could even ground this with the citation to reference a specific articulation of that concept of misdirected grief. So that might read something like, I realize now that I was acting out and that my stern critiques to my direct reports were what Johnson 2009 termed misdirections of grief. Tell us things like, what does this mean to you now? Like, oh, I feel profoundly guilty for having yelled at other people for the feelings that I had. And although I apologized profusely after the fact, I know that this permanently damaged our working relationship and led to 2 people leaving the team. What does this mean towards you in the future? Well, now when I experience a loss, I let others know and ask them to check me if I say something inappropriate or uncharacteristic. So that's going from reporting and processing to applying, that discovery or creation of new meaning that makes synthesis so powerful. And if we return to the assignment instructions for this reflection, that last prompt, that share how your own grief journey might affect your role, that's really asking for a lot of synthesis. Because there are all these things you've mentioned earlier in the reflection, but how do they add up? And how has that led to or inflected the course of what you are embarking on in your current path that has you taking this class? So I hope that those things were helpful. Just to do a quick recap of our ground, we did start with a discussion about how to use first person perspective in APA style. But we spent more of our time after that looking at the instructions for this particular assignment, how to break them down to understand the different tasks. We discussed how to create a timeline about grief and how different visual layouts affected the meaning that people will get from that. And if you're accessing the downloadable copy of the slide deck, you'll see 3 different versions of that. And then we talked about the process of outlining for self-assessment. So with that, I say that if you are dealing with the loss and you need someone to talk to, the university does have resources for that. So please don't ever feel that you are alone in something like this. But life is full of many things, and some we only enjoy for a small time. So loss can profoundly shape our experience, and both negative and positive things can come of it. So I hope that your life experiences have made you a better person, whatever those experiences may have been, and that from the things that we have lost, we have gained some as well. With that, I bid to you, please send us a question at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu if you have questions about this webinar or other topics. You can schedule an appointment by going to my.acu.edu and under academic resources, selecting Online Writing Center. And then you can visit the Online Writing Center website for more information, which is also linked from the my.acu.edu portal.